Okay, people. So I say the same things over and over and over to pretty much everyone on the topic of ketosis. So I figure this is the video, Ketosis 101. Everything we know as of April, almost May of 2017. So I'm going to preface this as we go with saying that nutritional ketosis, which we'll define here momentarily, is, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but it's people are all over the place on this topic. And I will tell you that nobody, including myself, knows what they're talking about. No one knows what they're talking about. There are people on one end who are still stuck in the 1990s, which when I did my exercise physiology degree at A&M, they taught us that fat was bad and that if you wanted to be an athlete, it was all pasta and cereal. All the way to the other end, which is kind of where I'm at, in that carbohydrates are not needed. You can do high intensity work without carbohydrates. Now, can you and should you might be a real topic to discuss, and I'll break down some of those issues as we go. And then there's people out there saying that carbohydrates cause cancer and measles and mumps and I don't know, whatever else. It's all over the place. The research is massively lacking. And I can throw research up for you. Like there's all kinds of studies. They all have some pretty major flaws. So today's little discussion is all off the cuff. I have like no notes. I tried to like make a plan, but if you know me, I don't really do that. So we're basically just going to go like as my brain goes, and we'll just see how that happens, and it'll be all great and fantastic. So let's just start with what is ketosis? What is it that we're even talking about? Like, what is it? Okay. So in a normal, and when I use the term normal today, what I'm talking about is a carbohydrate addicted person, individual. So back in the 1950s is where all this essentially started. Or at least it's where the controversy started. So Eisenhower, one of the most popular presidents in U.S. history, had a heart attack. And the sugar industry paid Harvard scientists. You can look this up. This happened. They jumped on his blood cholesterol as the reason the guy had a heart attack. I mean, let's just ignore the fact that he's probably one of the most high stressed out individuals to ever walk the earth, like he just won a world war. We'll ignore all that. It all had to do with his cholesterol. And they blamed his cholesterol, and they said his cholesterol was too high. And ignoring the known mechanism of fat metabolism, they blamed fat in his diet. They published something called the 7 Countries Study. That study showed that a high-fat diet caused increased cholesterol. That's the problem with the study. The study had 22 countries and they only published 7. So here we are. That started the high-carb, low-fat, cholesterol is bad, all of that. I mean, let's ignore the fact that like every hormone in your body is made by cholesterol. All right, this isn't a cholesterol lecture, but we could go there next if you wanted to. So you just have to ignore everything that the federal government tells you about how to eat. It's all biased. My other job is in air medical, and I get to go to the Capitol and talk to Congress people about all kinds of different things. Like you would think that it was all just great and fantastic, but it's not. It's lobbyists and interest groups, and there was people that were interested in selling sugar. Like that's just what it came down to. And so here we are. And so now to tell somebody to not eat sugar and eat fat means that we have to break through a whole lot of what people believe to be true. That's just, as I think of things to talk about, I'm just going to write them down here so I don't go on too many tangents. All right. So I told you have to hang with me through this because I didn't really make good notes. All right, so Eisenhower has a heart attack. Cholesterol is blamed. They take him off fat. The guy ate bacon and eggs like his whole life, like every day. They take all that away from him, and they give him cereal and bread. He has 2 or 3 more heart attacks. I don't exactly remember. A whole more dies of a heart attack. And the cholesterol at the time of his death was like 3 times higher than it was when they started. Yay, medicine. Okay. So there's that. In that process, though, everyone ignored all the second part, all right? And they stuck to eat carbohydrates. And we now have the fattest population in the whole world. Heart disease is up. Strokes up. Any cardiovascular issue known to humanity up. It's not working. So we have the federal government's food pyramid, which says to eat grains and cereal and bread and like all this craziness. And so when I say a normal diet, what I'm referring to is that. I don't consider that normal, but it's what 97% of the population probably eats that way, maybe more. I don't know. And so that's what I mean by normal, a carbohydrate addicted person. So in somebody that eats carbohydrates a lot, they live off of basically their liver and muscle glycogen, right? So these are carbohydrate storage containers. And so they eat all the time. They eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, all that. And their insulin levels just go up and down. I wish I could draw on the screen. That would be fun. I need like a better program to draw on the screen. Okay. Insulin goes up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Every time that insulin comes down, their body goes into like this mini panic mode. Oh no. And in order to stabilize their blood glucose, releases additional carbohydrates from glycogen from these places, and makes them hungry, right? Because now they're releasing carbohydrates, so they want to eat carbohydrates. So these people get hunger cravings every couple of hours, just over and over and over. Right? It's pretty predictable. If you've lived this way, then you eat, and then a few hours later you're hungry again. And that hunger is not because of a caloric deficit or because you're starving. It's simply because you've got insulin going up and down. Has really no basis in need. It's just the way you're designed. If you eat too many carbohydrates to the point that your glycogen storage tanks are too full, and you take those carbohydrates and you store them as fat, specifically white fat. And we didn't even really understand the difference between fat types until, 10 or 20 years ago, and then it takes a whole bunch of people to jump on board, so here we are now. And so you store it, and the typical American stores it as what's called white fat. And so we'll talk white versus brown here momentarily. We should write that down. I'll come back. So you store this as white fat, and these people just get fatter and fatter and fatter in every cycle. And then you come to think that's just normal, right? Because everybody around me, we're all getting older, we're getting fatter. But it doesn't have anything to do, you don't need that energy for anything other than to store it, because that's what your body does. The other piece to this were the bodybuilders. And they're actually a huge, we got to blame the bodybuilders quite a bit for this. So the bodybuilders would eat every 2 hours through the 80s and 90s, and you'll still see these guys doing this today. It's and several things are happening, right? So they're eating every 2 hours because they don't want to go into a what they would consider a negative nitrogen balance, in that they're pulling protein from their muscles. Well, let's think a moment. Why would somebody that's eating 8 times a day have to pull protein from their muscles? Well, the idea was, and is accurate for a carbohydrate-addicted athlete, that when your insulin drops and your glycogen stores decrease, you have to get glucose from somewhere. Where does that glucose come from? Well, we know it comes from liver glycogen, and we know it comes from muscle glycogen. But what happens if you don't have any more of that? Where is it? Glucose. Glucose has to come from somewhere. It comes from protein. And if I could go back and change my professors from the 90s and be like, I wish there was one thing you didn't tell me. They didn't say that we get glucose from protein. In fact, what they preached back then is that you can eat protein in your diet. It's never used as a fuel source. Like, this is all garbage. Protein is absolutely used as a fuel source, but it's not used as protein. It's converted into glucose. So when you think about the Atkins diet and people that were doing the Atkins diet early on, which was a genius diet, get rid of the controversy. It was genius, but there were mistakes people made. One of the mistakes people made on the Atkins diet is they ate too much lean meat. So instead of eating sausage and ribeye, they were eating lean turkey and lean brisket. And so they were getting all this protein. They were on what would be described as a high protein diet, not a high fat diet. We'll get to that when we define ketosis here in a minute and what is high fat. And so they were eating too much protein. And when you do, so they eliminated their glycogen in both their liver and their muscle. And now they're eating lean protein. It's the same thing as a bodybuilder eliminating their glycogen and then eating or not eating. They're going to pull that protein from the muscle, and those proteins are converted into glucose. And so then guess what your blood sugar does? It goes up. If your blood sugar goes up, what does your insulin do? It goes up. And so now, even though you didn't eat any carbs, your insulin was going up and down. Same thing that we discussed before when your insulin comes down. Guess what? You get hungry. It drives a craving. And a lot of these people they couldn't deal with that on an Atkins diet, right? I mean, they wanted the hunger cravings to go away, and they had heard people say if you give up carbs, your hunger cravings go away. It's not exactly accurate. You need to increase your fat and decrease your carbohydrates for your hunger cravings to go away. So I guess that ultimately that's the problem. So how do you do this? And then, of course, what is nutritional ketosis? So nutritional ketosis is basically entering a state where you eliminate your carbohydrates to a really low level. What is the number? It's different for everybody. I can do 50 or 60 grams a day at this point. I can eat a pepperoni pizza and be in ketosis tomorrow, like with the bread and everything. Like I don't do that very often, but I can do that. But I'm also in a training state where my average day is 5,000 calories a day. If I'm in a race environment, it's 10 or 15,000 calories a day. So if you're doing 5,000 calories a day, 60, 80, 100 grams of carbs is not a lot. If you're a normal person and your calorie needs are much lower, well, 60 grams a day is probably going to take you out of ketosis. There are a few ways to figure out if you're in ketosis. We'll go over that. How am I in? So we'll come back to that. So the number need for everybody is going to be significantly different. So that's just what it is. Most people on a normal, I guess a normal 3,000 calorie a day kind of thing, less than 50 grams of carbs typically will put you in ketosis. But yeah, you're gonna have to be low. So in the beginning, you start doing this. I guess we should talk about what to do. So what you really should focus on is getting your fat numbers up. So 70%, probably 80% fat. The higher, essentially, the better. So you'll drive your fat up. You're going to bring your carbohydrates, of course, down. And then what do you do with your protein? So I'm talking about athletes. I'm not talking about weight loss, but it's really no different in these two cases. And actually, when we talk research here in a bit, a bunch of the broken research in this, the broken part is most of these research studies are looking at weight loss people, and they're not looking at athletes. So there's some brokenness there. Protein needs to remain unchanged. No one needs more protein. Well, I see people drinking protein shakes, and man, it's just crazy. And like, there's all this, there's great new research on the amount of protein that you really need. If you're getting, as an athlete, if you're getting more than like 0.7, 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight a day, like you're getting too much. Like you're just pooping it out. Like you don't need it, or it actually has potential to take you out of ketosis. You got to be really careful. I don't supplement any protein. We'll talk about essential amino acids, and I think there might be some benefit there, but you got to be careful. You can't, if you get too much, insulin goes up from protein. Yeah, I know. So a lot of people miss that part. So insulin goes up from protein. So don't get too much. So fat needs to go up 70 or 80%. Protein needs to stay unchanged. You need to get rid of your carbohydrates. That's the formula. That's how easy it is. So we're talking about nutritional ketosis, which means the way you eat, generating yourself into ketosis. So instead of living off of glycogen stores and glucose, you're going to live off of fat cells and ketones. And the mechanism is just outside the scope of this video. Maybe I'll do another one. I'll draw all kinds of little pictures. But you're after a little thing called a ketone. So how do we get that? In the most basic term, how do I get a ketone so that I can use it? So there's two parts to living in ketosis. The first part is utilizing your fat cells to get ketones. So we need a fat cell to turn into a ketone. There's two kinds of fat cells, white and brown. You can get ketones from either, and that's really oversimplified too, by the way, but just hang with me. You can get ketones from either, but it's much simpler to get ketones from brown fat. How do you get brown fat? Well, brown fat is like your visceral fat, and for the longest time, people didn't think you could like convert the two, but you can if you want to. So if you want to be super efficient at pulling ketones from fat cells, the first thing you need to do is convert white fat to brown fat. You can Google this, but basically what it comes down to is cold exposure. You're going to take cold showers. You're going to go swim in your swimming pool in February, like just jump in. Cold exposure will ramp your metabolism. If you want to lose weight fast and do nothing else, like just start taking cold showers. It's great, but it totally works. So step one in all of this, and this is going to be important when I talk about what some products are that are out on the market, which I will do here shortly, but step one in this is taking your fat and turning them into ketones. The next part of this is taking that ketone body, beta hydroxybutyrate specifically, and using it for energy. So you have to train yourself, your brain, your muscles to use ketones, and they will do so as a priority. If you hand your brain glucose and ketones together, guess what your brain is going to do? It's going to pick the ketones, which is the opposite of what we taught everybody in the whole world. How do we figure this out? Two ways. Number one, pediatric neurologists have been using ketogenic diets as a treatment for kids with epilepsy for like a bazillion years. Knowing that, a physician that was working with Navy SEALs in Pensacola trying to prevent seizures underwater figured out that if he made, because he believed, as we all did, that these Navy SEALs needed carbohydrates, right? He didn't want to remove carbs. He didn't want them living in nutritional ketosis because he was afraid of it. So what he did was he made an exogenous ketone, just a ketone in a bottle. It tasted like kerosene. I've tried this stuff. It's horrible. Don't do it. There's better options. Anyway, he would feed this stuff to these guys, and they didn't have seizures underwater. And he then realized that the brain picked ketones as he tested these guys. It's crazy. The brain picked ketones over glucose. So even if they had a glucose of 130, 140, whatever going in, when they drank ketones, their blood glucose dropped, and their brain chose ketones. And these guys were totally fine, and they didn't have seizures. So, interesting. Side note. So how long does that take? So if you go today and you're like, hey, I want to do this. I want to live in nutritional ketosis. How's this? How long? So you're going to hear a lot of different stuff on the internet. So what you're going to hear is 3 to 4 weeks, and you'll be good to go. They are talking to weight loss people. They're not talking about athletic performance. So I would agree. 3 weeks, you'll get 80% of the benefits. Your hunger cravings will go away. You'll feel like $1 million. You're going to lose a bunch of weight. Most of the weight that you lose in the first week and a half is water. That is not specific to ketogenic diets. That is specific to any weight loss plan. If you ever go into a calorie deficit, the majority of the weight you lose in the beginning is water. So just get over it. If you do it right and you stay in ketosis and your goal is weight loss, a pound a week is definitely not unheard. I mean, it's totally normal. My dad's, 60 pounds down. He's doing it for a while. He's not as dedicated as he was, but he's definitely, on target. Like it just happens. He feels amazing. So yeah, you'll lose a lot if you're in a calorie deficit. And I guess this would be a good place to talk about what's wrong with so many of these research projects and why are so many of them getting it bad. When I see athletic research done on athletes in ketosis, I see a couple of main issues. Number one is oftentimes these athletes are in a calorie deficit. So a lot of the negatives that are coming from these research studies, whether they're hormonal or whatever, it's usually a hormonal issue or power issue or whatever. These athletes are typically in a caloric deficit because they haven't figured out how to maintain their calorie needs through a high-fat diet, which sounds so crazy. But when you remove carbs Oftentimes, these people go into massive calorie deficits, which of course is the goal if you want to lose weight. It works great for that. But if you're an athlete, you might not want to lose weight. So what do you do? The other big problem I see in most of these research studies is these people have not been in ketosis very long. Oftentimes, these guys have been in ketosis for less than a year. And if I'm talking about an athlete that's lived in ketosis less than a year, I don't know. I can look at where I was when I was a year into ketosis and the things that I've learned now at like the 3 to 4 year, mark of being in ketosis. And I think I'm a completely different athlete, and I've learned so many different things that I think there's too many broken pieces and too many variables in those studies to be accurate. And on another note, like I get tested all the time, every few months now, and so I know exactly where all of my hormone levels are, where all of my liver enzymes are, where my fatty acids and cholesterol. Like I know where everything is. Like I know, and I know where I have some deficits. And I'll explain those because those are odd. Like they're deficits that we see in keto athletes that you might not expect. So those are the two parts: fat to ketones, ketones to usable energy for an athlete. That's the whole part of this. So professional athletes, why don't they do this? Well, the truth is some of them do now. A couple of years ago, I would tell you there were virtually none, but there are. These athletes do exist. The reason you don't see too many professional athletes doing this at too high of a level currently is because when you go into ketosis, you have to get through that 3 to 4 week period. And I just told you that athletes with less than a year of ketosis have some issues. So it's very difficult for a professional athlete that is dependent upon their salary to be like, go to their coach the next day and say, hey, I'm going to go into ketosis. Like they're not going to be excited about that because there's going to be a power drop. There's going to be some struggle in the beginning. Now, for the people who are able to get through that, the benefits are amazing. In my last race, I did 362 miles, like on 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and a couple of shakes. It's crazy, right? I mean, 30-something hours in a race, no resupply, nothing, just water. Like so, I just go, and with no issue. All right, nutritional deficits. So what happens to these people when they've been in ketosis for a while? Well, it's interesting. One of the biggest things that you're going to see is massively low triglyceride levels, especially the good ones, omega-3 and so forth. So you would think these guys are eating 80% fat. Like how in the world could their triglycerides be low? But you have to understand, like you don't eat fat. It doesn't just like float through and then become flat in your bloodstream, right? Like your liver's got to work to make this whole thing happen. So almost universally, people who are living in nutritional ketosis need to supplement with fish oil, flax oil, chai seed, any of that, and they need a lot in order to help make this process work. You need those fatty acids, and if you're sticking to MCT oil and butter and those things, you're not necessarily going to get the fatty acid ratio that you need. So fish oil, flax, chai seed, all of those. You need those. And that's just across the board. I don't otherwise recommend supplements universally for people who aren't being tested ordinarily. Or if I do for my own athletes, that'd be outside the scope of nutritional ketosis. So hire a coach and we can do all that stuff too. But I don't just normally do that. So we talked about the studies and what's wrong with them. Fruit and healthy eating. Okay, look, like you have to give it up. There's nothing in fruit for you. Let it go. So many people are, I'm going to go low carb or I'm going to be in ketosis. Here, do you want a strawberry? No, I don't want a strawberry. So what's the problem? When was that apple picked from the one you just bought at the grocery store? When was that plucked from the tree? Does anybody know? Bueller? Anybody? No, nobody knows. It was on a tree in some other country, and then it was refrigerated or frozen or whatever. It showed up at your store, I don't know, weeks later. The enzymes and nutrients that you think are in there that you're eating because it's healthy carbs, they're not there. There's a reason when you go to the hospital and get a blood transfusion that blood is like days old. It didn't sit on a shelf for 3 weeks. There's an expiration date. There should be an expiration date on that apple. So what are you eating when you eat the apple or the strawberry? You're getting sugar. The same sugar that is in a can of Coca-Cola is in the strawberry. I know, like, here it comes. Oh no, it's sugar. You're like, yeah, but there's fiber. Please, don't just there's nothing there for you. So let them go. If you really think that you're in some nutritional micronutrient deficit, like eggs are loaded, people. Like it'll be okay. White fat, brown fat. We talked about it. How do I know if I'm in ketosis? We should talk about that. So there's a few ways. Oftentimes, people who are new to ketosis will go and buy those urine test strips at Walgreens or CVS or whatever, and you can do that. But please understand that only works for the first part. Am I converting fat into ketones? If you're doing that, you will pee a large number of those ketones out, and you can pee on the little test strip, and it'll say that you're in ketosis. But that will very quickly not work. Because as your body gets good at using ketones, you won't pee them out anymore. You're going to use them. So the only good way to know if you're in ketosis is either the most accurate way is a blood test, which will it's like a glucometer. It'll tell you that you're in ketosis. It'll give you a millimolar count of how many ketones you have, basically. And there's another product that can be kind of hard to get. It does exist. It's like they make them in limited runs, and so you just kind of have to watch Amazon. It's called the Ketonics Sport, or I think it's now called the Ketonics Red, which is a breathalyzer. And because when you're in ketosis, I promise your loved ones will tell you, I don't know, I brush my teeth 3 or 4 times a day, Listerine thing, like it's part of it. But anyway, you can it's a breathalyzer, blow in the thing until the light changes colors, and then it'll tell you kind of at what level of ketosis that you're in. The Ketonics people, it's actually a medical company. They weren't really interested in helping athletes out, so they weren't really making a lot of these things for the market early on anyway, but they seem to be ramping up because they realize this is kind of a big thing, and so that's kind of helpful. So what do we eat? Well, now there's great websites. I mean, you can just go to any of the keto websites. Yeah, it's a lot of eggs and bacon and butter. Get the grass-fed butter, the good stuff. If you're European and you're watching this, you're like, what's grass-fed butter? It's just butter to a European. To an American, we get garbage butter at the grocery store. It's trash. But if you can get the Kerrygold butter, it's the stuff that's imported from Ireland usually, that's what you want. And you can even buy it now at like Sam's and some of these others. And so that's really good. Coconut oil is good. So coconut oil is basically what's called a medium chain triglyceride, which is the most efficient way to get into ketosis. And then you can take it one step further and you can buy MCT oil. So MCT oil is just super concentrated coconut oil, and it's great. I will tell you, don't buy the liquid stuff anymore. The liquid stuff can be really hard on your gut, and they make this one. I'm not sure what happened. My video kind of cut out there for a minute. Anyway, they make this one, which I think they're all pretty much the same. This is like the Amazon recommended one, and this is just powder. It's MCT powder. You can eat a lot more of this without the GI upset. All of these, though, are very efficient fatty fat, right? So you cannot put this in a styrofoam container. So a lot of people make bulletproof coffee, which is a great way to do this. And so they'll put this stuff in their coffee and blend it, but you need to put it in a real coffee cup. If you put it in a styrofoam or something, it will eat through that. Which is what you want because it's efficient. It's the way it works. It's the way it works. I get these text messages from athletes, and they're like, "Oh my god, like you're telling me to eat this, and it just melted my coffee cup." Just get over it. But anyway, I'm at the point, and I'll talk about, I guess, what I put in my bottle here in a minute. But MCT powder is a really good way to go. So we'll just do that. So in my bottle. Whether I'm on a really long ride or first thing in the morning, I'll put 3 scoops of MCT powder. And if you want to destroy your appetite, put 3 scoops. And I promise, especially if you're on weight loss, you will not be hungry for a very long time. This stuff totally fills you up. Next, ketones. So we got to talk about ketones. So I said earlier that I had tried the liquid ketones from those, the Navy SEAL thing. And those were horrible. And you can buy liquid ketones on the market right now. Don't do it. It's like kerosene. So a number of people, including this is Julian Bakery, have come up with a powdered ketone. This is the only one that I like. I've tried 2 or 3 others, and they're just too caustic almost. This one's quite a bit more expensive than a lot of those others, but I don't know. I 1 scoop of ketones, and your blood ketone level will skyrocket. Now here's the thing I'm going to tell you. Nobody really knows the answer to this. Should somebody on weight loss be using exogenous ketones? These things are totally marketed for people trying to lose weight. And ultimately we don't know. My instinct says no, right? Because remember, there were 2 parts, right? You need to turn this into ketones, and then you need to use the ketones for energy. If I'm supplementing this and trying to lose weight, then do I need to convert this to this? Well, no. So you may very well shut your fat loss down if you eat too many of these. It's kind of the idea. But again, I started this. We don't know what we're talking about. So I actually have a few weight loss clients supplementing with this right now. Small study group, but we'll see what happens. I think there may be a place for this in weight loss. I'm not sure. I can definitely tell you there is a place for this in athletic performance. It's just food, right? Like it's, who knows? UCI will probably try to ban it, right? Like they're going to ban glucose next. So who knows, right? But it's just ketones. And if you supplement with this, you'll definitely, it's like diesel fuel especially for any athlete. Frequently asked questions at the end. I don't know. Bodybuilders, yes. I have friends, bodybuilders in ketosis. They're there. CrossFit, yes, they're there. And yes, this is for everybody. I don't know how to say it. So in my bottle, 3 scoops of this, 1 scoop of this, and then some of this. So this is, it's labeled branch chain amino acid. This one is actually should be labeled essential amino acid. It's just from bulk supplements, which is the cheapest way to get it, I guess. And I use Labdoor for most of my independent research on what is actually in the bag. And these guys typically are rated pretty highly. So I don't do a lot of essential amino acids, just a scoop in that same bottle. I'm just not ready to say yes or no as to are these helpful or are they not helpful. Studies have gone both ways. But when I'm in a super heavy, there's a squirrel. So the dogs are going to get the squirrel. So if I'm in a super heavy training session, or even in recovery now, I typically put 1 scoop in the bottle. There's some other products that are on the market. These are bulletproof bars. These bars are they're just fat. So they're out there. And newly, almost done, I promise. Ketone bars. Haven't tried them. Haven't even opened them yet. Just showed up in the mail. It's the same as like these people. And just thought I'd see how that goes. So what does the kind of the daily timing of all of this look like? Well, the best part of all of this is there's no timing like you had in carbohydrates, where the bodybuilders would do the 2 hours thing over and over and over. You don't have to do that in ketosis, because if your body's pulling fat for energy, it's no longer pulling protein from your muscles to convert to glucose. So people who are in ketosis do not lose the muscle mass that those carbohydrate-addicted athletes were losing. It just doesn't happen. They hang on to that muscle tissue for much, much, much longer. So the timing's not a big deal. For people trying to lose weight, I typically recommend an 8-hour fasting period, or an 8-hour eating period, so 16-hour fast. Some people call it intermittent fasting, right? So they'll wake up in the morning, they'll have a coffee, and then around 10 a.m. they start eating and quit eating around 4 or 6 p.m., and that gives their body a good break. Breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. If you're losing too much weight doing that, though, then you have to extend that window. And so I will typically do the bottle that I told you first thing in the morning. Otherwise, I'll lose too much weight. I'll eat for 10 or 12 hours a day, typically if I'm training in a heavy environment. If I'm in a recovery phase or just not burning through the amount of calories, then I'll shorten my eating window for sure. Put butter on everything. So, butter in your eggs, butter in your coffee. How do you make bulletproof coffee? I didn't really talk about that, but if you just take your coffee, pour it in a blender, pour in butter and MCT oil, hit the blender, it turns into like a I don't know, some fancy Starbucks frothy thing, and pretty good. And you can totally play with that. The MCT powder blends really well in bulletproof coffee if you do it that way. So that's amazing and fantastic. And then fatty salads. I typically throw in fatty salads. You're like, okay, look, yeah, but you pick the green leafy carbs, and don't go overboard. And load it with ranch or Caesar or a fatty dressing, or make your own dressing. You can make bread out of flaxseed, which is amazing. A super high fat bread. You can make pizza. You can do whatever the case may be. If you're an athlete, you have to be careful that you're not going to caloric deficit when you do this. If you're doing it for weight loss, knock yourself out. So that's Ketosis 101, I guess. So if you're new to the whole thing, do all that stuff. I don't know, maybe I should make a pamphlet or book or something. I don't know, but that's what I know. Later.